The route from CSP to DSP is open, but this means embracing the principles of the open service provider. Yes, open networking, but also an open culture, ecosystem, and services. In other words, CSPs need to adopt an open mindset.
I think that service providers in general need to change the culture of their business in many instances. I think that they need to create an environment. Notice when you asked me the question, I didn't mention open source. For us, open source is a development methodology that delivers a supportable manifestation of a product. Underneath that, having an open organization that encourages that development, that culture, that level of innovation is actually really important.
From my perspective, and I believe that open is, first of all, it's a cultural thing, right? So it's a mindset that you need to wake up every morning focusing on how can I, as a executive or as an engineer, as a developer, be more open in how I approach my day-to-day activity. You've got to approach your business in a way that you will take that risk, you will fail fast, and you will iterate and evolve, and then share those learnings across the industry.
Of course, there's different way to look at open source in general, but I think for me, if I have to pick something, which is I believe is the fundamental core of what open source is, I would say collaboration, open collaboration. And that's not just within the organization itself. It has to also be external collaboration, being able to work with global players, finding common grounds, finding consensus, building a technology that scales horizontally rather than focusing on developing things internally and coming up with a vertical stack that will have to operate in isolation.
What do I think of when I think of an open mindset? I think of ecosystem and I think of interoperability, and I think open source is a vehicle that we use for open collaboration to help develop an open ecosystem. I think that's really what we have to be looking for, and open mindset and open approach to doing things that allows for seamless interoperability is what we have to sort of approach the challenge of 5G, or the 5G infrastructure at least, with.
And for that, I think also in terms of collaboration, having open source communities as well as standard setting organization working together in sync and collaborative together to accelerate the adoption of digital and cloud solutions, I think is a key. And we have seen a lot of signs for that to be happening, but I think this is really a key element for us to have everyone talking to each other, collaborate with each other, so we get the best value out of everyone.
Our CEO wrote a book, Jim Whitehurst, called The Open Organization. We talk about that a lot in terms of working with service providers and helping them evolve from becoming CSPs to DSPs, and talk about how to create an environment with small development groups initially to start in order to create that level of innovation, fail fast, be agile, and drive that culture in the business. So it's something that you can't change overnight. It needs to be built in time. And with failing fast means you have to create a environment of trust.
But let's not kid ourselves either. Openness in general is very, very difficult culture change and shift in an industry that has a very traditional mindset. I think operators get a hard time from the industry saying, hey, you got to change. I've spoken to Neil McRae about this earlier on this morning, that it's difficult, right? It's a tough journey, and you're going to make mistakes along the way.
Of course, we have incumbent mindsets, incumbent practices. It's a question of vendor choice as well. When it comes down to if I choose this and I start to develop on this, does that allow me to freely move things around, or do I have to leave it on that platform, for instance? If I choose this hardware, does it allow me to run different operating systems? And these questions, I think, are still nascent in our planning processes. We're not really executing towards that yet, because we're still trying to understand how do these questions actually play out when I start to try and build a hyperscale flat infrastructure.
There are lots of technical things that need to be resolved. There are a lot of networking things that need to be resolved from a telco perspective. There are also a lot of resourcing things that need to be resolved. So if you can write an application, you put it out in the cloud, you need to kind of know that the resources are there and available to run it. So there's a lot of that technology, that standardization that needs to take place. So I think because of that, and because of the cloud, people are having to look at solving problems very differently than they had done over the last 10 years or so. And it's kind of forcing the change into the ecosystem, which is exciting from our perspective, because open source is just one tool set that you can use. There are other tools that you can use to achieve the same results. And we're very excited because it enables us to deliver a lot of value into that business.
I think the real benefit from open source does not come from the fact that it's free and can be used by anyone. It comes from the fact that it's unified and is used by everyone. And that's, I think, is a fundamental basis and principle for us when we start looking at adopting open source technology. And in that way, we could focus more into doing innovation work, providing values to our customers by introducing new services and offloading all the verification, interoperability, integration questions back to the community, because now we have that unified way of dealing with challenges we see from networking, storage, and the VI abstraction, and so on and so forth.
I think the operator community is heading, or wanting to head to an open interoperable ecosystem. They want to be able to collaborate with each other. They want to be able to leverage each other's infrastructures. They want to be able to monetize what they have.
And what we see with companies like AT&T as a good example, they have some great innovation. They do some phenomenal things. And what we're trying to do, and with the other vendors as well, is work with them in terms of getting those use cases defined in the upstream community so that code can be maintained over time. So they can focus on innovation and leading edge stuff from a digitalization perspective, and we get the community to maintain and evolve and innovate on it.
Every single comm service provider has the skill set. It happens to sit in a different business unit a lot of the time, right? It's the IT infrastructure, it's the cloud side of the business. And I think operators have recognized that, right? And are trying to cross-pollinate skill sets across into network, which is fantastic. From an Intel perspective, scaling cloud economics to the network is the green light for everybody, right? It creates an unbelievable opportunity for the entire community to make money, for operators to deliver new services. The challenge around skill set is actually at the operator level. I don't know any operator that doesn't have it. I think it's a question of, as we would say, crossing the aisle, reaching across the aisle and building a coalition of the willing around cloud, right? And making sure that there's value on both sides of the business.
You need corporate leadership to be on board. Corporate leadership doesn't necessarily need to understand what that means. They just need to know that there is a need for change, because they've got to keep the business running and make room for change. So you need corporate leadership sponsorship, and then you need leaders through the organization that can help drive that change.
What I'd love to see, Guy, is when we look at open source and the best known methods out of open source, what if we solve that business model challenge and having a open community that not just looks at the technical problems, but looks at the business challenges and comes together, and the operators can define a standard, if you will, around how this business should be driven through the industry as well.
My takeaway at this point in time, as I see things, is we're executing in the right direction. We have a long way to go before the vendors are providing what's needed to make that a reality, and the operators are understanding how to invest and work with the vendors to actually realize those capabilities in their networks.